Tonight we're going to be reviewing what is called one of David Lynch's more approachable films. David Lynch's two most tame works is 1980's Elephant Man, which we'll be reviewing tonight, and this other film from the mid-90s, The Straight Story, a rated G Disney film, which we will have to get to. But tonight we will be reviewing The Elephant Man, starring Anthony Hopkins and John Hurt. So, this movie was nominated for 8 Academy Awards. It came out the year that my parents were married in 1980. And it is a 2-hour and 4-minute runtime, and it is directed, like I said, by David Lynch, who has become one of my favorites with his bizarre ways of, my wife and I went down a whole thing with Twin Peaks over the summer, and I fell in love with his ideas, his philosophies, his kind of weird ways. But this movie is not, it has some elements of David Lynch from what I've seen, but this movie, albeit made in 1980, felt like it could have been as easily have made in 1965, 66, late 60s, mid to late 60s. It's a timeless film, and it felt like it was a throwback to period films. Recently, I had reviewed The Miracle Worker with Anne Bancroft, who's interestingly enough in this movie as well, because Mel Brooks is attached to this film, which we'll get into, but it felt kind of like a similar time period as far as it being filmed in black and white and the way they approached it. This film was given to Mel Brooks, and he wanted to produce it, but he was a silent producer because he didn't want people to think it was going to be a comedy. So he silently produced it. He had seen Eraserhead, David Lynch's 1977 film, and he had asked Lynch to direct it, and Lynch was working on another project that ended up getting shelved, and he ended up reading the script and liking it and signing on to direct it. It had a $5 million budget, and Brooks was very fair in letting them just kind of do what they wanted to do. Anthony Hopkins is great. John Hurt is great in this film. Interestingly enough, the main character's real name is Joseph Merrick, but for whatever reason in this movie, they call him John Merrick. And John Hurt said he learned to hate acting from playing the Elephant Man because it took them 6 to 8 hours every production day to get him into that suit of a disfigured man. So the screenplay was adapted by Lynch and a few other people from a 1923 book written by Dr. Travers, the guy that the Anthony Hopkins character plays. And that book is called The Elephant Man and Other Reminiscences. They also took inspiration from a 1971 book by Ashley Montagu called The Elephant Man, A Study in Human Dignity. And again, I mentioned it was nominated for 8 Academy Awards and won a bunch of British acting awards. I think it won a Golden Globe Award. It's a very well-regarded film. It was edited by Ann Coates, who was famous for directing, she was famous for directing David Lean's Lawrence of Arabia, and she's kind of an impactful woman because at the time, less than 3% of women were doing editorial work in the film industry. So she was kind of a trailblazer. Dustin Hoffman really wanted the role of John Merrick, but they felt like you wouldn't know how to separate the Dustin Hoffman personage from the character, and they wanted somebody else. Lynch wanted the guy from Eraserhead, whose name I didn't write down, but eventually they ended up going with John Hurt. And like I said, Anne Bancroft has a role in it. There's just a lot of great players. The guy from the movie that plays the butler in the movie Arthur plays like the lead guy at the hospital. What else do I have to say about it? In North America, it was a commercial success, $26 million at the box office. I did not see an international total. It's beautifully shot in black and white in a time, I think it must have been like a fad thing, because I think 1980 or 81 was the same year that Raging Bull came out. Martin Scorsese put out a full-length black and white film, I think the same year as this. But again, it kind of felt fitting to a lot of the other period films from the 19th century that came out in the 60s that I saw. It felt like it could have been in that time, like I mentioned earlier. So this movie is a darling of critics, and its acting is great. The story is great. It's a sad movie, but it's a real-life adaptation of this guy that was horribly disfigured and died in a tragic way. So Rotten Tomato critics score is 92%. Over 50,000 audience members have submitted their score to Rotten Tomatoes for an average of 93%, quite high. IMDb, it's rare to see anything out of the sevens. 8.2 out of 10. 193 people have submitted their reviews on Google for an average of 4.6 out of 5. And this is an ultra rare Corey Granith 5 out of 5. The Elephant Man. I have been on a kick lately of Anthony Hopkins. We recently have reviewed The Edge, and then we also recently reviewed Meet Joe Black. I tried to get my wife to be a co-reviewer for this movie, and there are certain movies that she just cannot get into, and she walked out of it. It wasn't for her. It's hard for her to get through the old-timey movies, black and white stuff. It's not for her, so it didn't capture her interest, which is a disservice to me because I know cinema. To each their own. We're not hoity-toity like those critics are, right? Some people aren't going to like a movie like this. That's perfectly fine. I thought it was beautifully filmed, great acting. I see David Lynch's kind of him building up to what he would be like when we got really into Twin Peaks, where he's doing a lot of the surrealist stuff, dream sequence type of stuff, and it's just a great film and an enjoyable watch. Is it an uplifting film? In some ways, yes, but in a lot of ways, it's kind of a downer, especially if you watch it till the end. So that's my take on The Elephant Man. Check it out. I don't know if it's on streaming. This is the first DVD release from 2001. They have since done remastered 4K versions of this where David Lynch does a commentary. This one does not have any of that. So I would be interested, if you really want to dig deep, pick up a more recent release of this movie where David Lynch will talk about it. Until next time, we'll see you then. Thanks for watching, folks.